Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm Mike Lowe, and we are here in NBA 2K23. We're going to talk about my top tips for starting a new MyNBA. We're going to talk a little bit about the different eras that you get to choose from. We're going to talk a little bit about settings, rosters, customization, even the WNBA. So there's a lot to get to here. I know you're all excited to start your first MyNBA of the year, so let's get right to it. So the very first thing that you need to decide in your new MyNBA is which era to start in. Now, you've probably heard about these. If not, I have various videos kind of covering each of these actually on my YouTube channel. But generally, you'll want to make that decision, and there's pros and cons to each one. And there's some additional customization that can go on in each one, and we'll get to that in some of the other tips here. But that's really the first place you need to start, is which era do you want to start in? Why do you want to start there? And then really trying to understand what the pros and cons of each of the eras are. By the way, if you're looking just to start a 2022 MyNBA, it's actually the modern era. That's where you want to start, and that can be a little bit confusing when you first start. But of course, the different eras start in different years. Magic vs. Bird starts in the 1983 season. The Jordan era starts in 1991, and then Kobe starts in 2002. So just depends what you want to do. You'll get all of the custom rosters and whatnot, but again, not everything's perfect, and we'll get into a little bit more of those customization options shortly. Okay, so let's assume that you've decided to start in the Jordan era, which starts with the 1991 season. It'll have the 1992 draft class that you can load, which has Shaquille O'Neal and Alonzo Mourning in it. And you're really wanting to make sure that you have this realistic and so on. And one of the first things you're probably thinking about is the actual roster. And so the rosters right out the gate, as well as the draft class, aren't bad. They're going to be probably within 85, maybe 90% accuracy. And it's going to have all the top players that you recognize: Jordan, Malone, Robinson, Drexler, and so on. One of the things, though, that's going to maybe frustrates you a little bit, especially if you're kind of a stickler for realism or really, really accurate rosters, is that as you kind of scroll through these teams and you look at kind of the lower rated players, you're going to see some teams, just about all of them, will have fake players. They're not completely fleshed out for whatever reason, licensing and so on. Now, that might not be a huge issue for some of the guys deeper down the bench. A lot of these guys aren't going to have like really high potentials, as you can see, but you never know. One of these guys, even in the C+ range, might kind of creep up and become a player, and that could be immersion breaking. What's probably a bigger deal is when you go look at teams, say like the Pacers, you're going to notice certain players missing, right? You notice there's no Reggie Miller on this team. If you go to the 76ers, you're going to see that it's missing perhaps one of their most iconic players ever in Charles Barkley. He's not here. Now, that's kind of common knowledge at this point. They've never been in NBA 2K as far as I'm aware. But that can be kind of a big deal, right? So how do you go through and get these players into an accurate 1991 in this case, or other era? But sticking with 91, how do we actually get this done? Well, you're probably thinking that, well, yeah, I need to go in and create a roster or download a roster. That's partially true. What's really, really important, though, is that if you just go into kind of your modern roster, which is what a lot of us are used to doing, you can go in and say, yeah, I need to get a user-created roster because they're going to have Reggie Miller and they're going to have Charles Barkley and so on. But these rosters here, the way we loaded it in, are only for modern era, right? So it's really, really, really important that you go in and actually get a roster that's from your appropriate era, right? So if you go in here, you're going to be able to see the user-created rosters that are just for 91, 92, right? So you can actually download this here if you wanted. You can save it and so on. You can certainly look through it, and there you can see Charles Barkley, and you're going to see Reggie Miller and the Pacers and so on. Whoops, wrong way. And so it's going to be a much, much more accurate roster. It's going to not only have the top players that are missing, but it's going to have the depth players added as well. I believe most of these top-rated rosters at this point are fully fleshed out. You're going to have 100% real players, and I would imagine like coaching staffs and stuff like that, although I'm not positive on the coaching staffs because I'm not sure if you can edit all of that in a roster file per se. But a lot of these roster creators do have threads, say, on Operation Sports, or they have Twitter handles that you can follow that can kind of clue you in on some of the things that might be missing or how best to add those in. So you'll want to save this roster, right? And you can just kind of go out and then go back and start up an actual MyNBA in that particular era. And then let's look at kind of the next step that you'll need to do here in order to make sure that you're getting these in properly. Okay, so we're back in the My Eras section here, or the era selection area of MyNBA. And just like before, we're going to pick the Jordan era, and that's going to load up. And whether you have your file, roster file that is saved locally or not, there is still another way that you can load this in, right? So one of the things you'll need to do, though, is you need to hit triangle on PS5, and you need to come over here and you need to activate custom roster. Now, there's a lot of other things you can activate, but for this tutorial here, we're just going to do that. Now, that kicks you to that exact same screen, but more specifically, it takes you to the 2K share roster screen for just the Jordan era, right? So this is exactly the same file. It's been updated 533 times, and you can look at these offline again, just like we showed you, and you could go through and see. It's not always the top rated one isn't always the best. You may be looking for something a little bit different, but you can load in that file here. You can select your team, and now when we load in, you're going to have exactly the same setup. We can use the exact same draft. Actually, I can show you the draft class too, right? So you can go in here, the same thing. The historic draft class isn't bad, but again, it's missing some players. It's not going to be 100% accurate. And so, of course, if you wanted, you could load in the 2023 draft class or whatever. But if you scroll down or use the search feature, you'll eventually come to a 1992 draft class. And so let's just use the top rated one, and we can load that in now. Now you have loaded in really the most accurate roster, whatever one you decided you like. Now you have Barkley, you have Reggie Miller, you have the bench teams filled out, and you're going to have a draft class that has not only the top players, but really depth all the way down. If you were just kind of look at the full draft class, you're going to start to see a lot of familiar faces, or unfamiliar faces potentially, right? As you kind of go in and just look at the depth here. So you're going to have really, really fleshed out draft classes to kind of go along with this. And I can't confirm 100% all of these guys are real, but that's the idea. If there isn't one today, as I'm making this video, there probably is by the time you're jumping in to your MyNBA for this year, or there's going to be one coming up there soon. So again, just got to do a little bit of research on your own, but that's how you'd at least get your MyNBA started in a particular era with accurate rosters and an accurate draft class. All right, let's talk about the next step here, and that's getting your settings accurate, or at least how you want them. So we're going to jump now into a modern era MyNBA, because this is the kind of the settings that most of you are probably the most familiar with, I guess you could say. And again, these are completely optional, but for instance, I can just show you what I typically will go in. I activate a lot of stuff because you can always just bypass it, and you can always just kind of skip over and but at least gives you an option to kind of look at some different things. I only use morale and chemistry on that screen. I don't really automate anything unless I'm doing like quick sims for testing. I turn these on. But again, you can really kind of go through and do anything you want here, including starting in the off season, which is such a cool feature that more games need. But this is typically how I get rolling here. And then I can just hit advance, and then same thing here. I can download my roster. Now this time I want to use an actual like modern roster, and that's what it's loading me into. Notice I don't see the 1991 rosters anymore because I'm in a modern era MyNBA. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick my team. But you can see here, it loads me up into these settings. So if I wanted to, I could go in, I can move teams around. I could actually add expansion teams right from the start, even in a regular season start. You'd have an expansion draft, but you wouldn't have like an amateur player selection draft. So that first season, any expansion teams, if you went this route, wouldn't be part of the draft. But if you started in the off season, you would. So again, pros and cons to that. But same thing, you can add teams. You can actually add classic teams. So if you're curious to see, like, I wonder how the 70-71 Bucks would do in the modern NBA, throw them into a division and you can just do a quick sim with it. Or maybe my 89 Pistons, right? So there's lots of different things you can do with this. Even just moving teams around, you can kind of overload different conferences, or overload, I should say, divisions. I don't think you can actually overload the conferences by more than one team. But yeah, point is you have some options there, but notice I'm just skipping it. I'm not going to do anything here. I'm just going to hit start. Same thing here. You have tons of different options, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but I can say the best place to check for settings is Operation Sports. Go to their NBA 2K section in their forum. You can look in the slider section. I have my own setup there. If you want to check it out, it's just under Mike Lowe, MyNBA or something like that. In their area, there's lots of other ones. Schnate's got a really, really great set I've used in the past. There's tons of them, right? So I don't try to compete with other settings or slider makers, but lots of cool options. Everyone plays a little bit different, so you can find the set that works for you. I would recommend turning off autosave. I do a lot of testing and kind of just dabbling here and there to kind of see how the game functions, and autosave sometimes can mess you up. But otherwise, you have a ton of freedom to kind of do all these different things. Yes, it takes a little bit of time to get the settings how you want, but nonetheless, once you get these set, this game does a good job of, it doesn't mess it up later on, like say FIFA this year and things like that. So you can go in and get all those things set. But for this case, we're just going to skip it. Same thing here, right? Rule changes. I can go in, I can add any kind of rule I want, whether it's lottery or standing rules, shot clock, so on. All of these different things. I can select to add my own rule. There's all kinds of different things you can do here, or just hit start and skip it, right? But it gives you the option. So here is where you're going to be able to go in and just make your team selection. I know some people like to do full team selection, and that's totally fine if you want to do that. For me, I just usually pick one team. Sometimes I'll activate a team later on, and I can show you how to do that if I need to actually go through and maybe edit something, or like a player's got a jersey number that's driving people on my streaming series crazy. I'll go in and fix that or something like that. But let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of other things here that you can do. I believe there's actually a way you can edit, or you can use kind of like random personalities even for your governors, and I'm just forgetting where that is now. But I do believe that is an option. So let's just say we want to be the Sixers here. We're just going to hit start. So, and it's going to kick us right to the start of the MyNBA. There's the modern era. Not a huge thing there. But again, notice the modern era technically starts well before the 2022 season. And where this matters is if you start in one of the previous eras, eventually you'll get to, I forget if it's like, I think it might be 2012 or maybe 2010. It'll kick in and you'll see the screen and it'll kind of transition, and this is when all your graphics and stuff update. So really a lot of the stuff you're seeing on the screen here is moot because it's already happened. You're in 2022 when you start in the modern era. So same thing here. You can use the auto-generated classes. I don't hate those as much as everyone else. I get it. Some of the looks are kind of really goofy, but really the only issue with the looks typically are sometimes names don't really match like ethnicities a lot of times, at least like historically. And like hairstyles and stuff. But hairstyles are super easy. I mean, I'll just kind of click around until I find a hairstyle that kind of matches the player's look a little bit better, or their name, or whatever the case may be. Maybe I'll throw in some suffixes to their name, such as like, John Smith II or John Smith Jr. or whatever. And so that's cool. Or of course you could just download a custom one like you can here. And of course there's real life draft classes like you see here, but there's also fictional ones. If you were to search, scroll down, or if you were just to kind of look for using the search feature, you can actually find like custom, or I should say fictional draft classes, but they've been like tailored, right? They've been cleaned up for you already. So like here's one here. Here's a fictional one. So we could go in and kind of see how that draft class was, say, cleaned up, right? So if we go into prospect scouting, this is a fake draft class, and you guys can be the judge, how the players kind of look here, if it all kind of matches up and kind of fits maybe what you're looking for. And again, these are always being adjusted, so again, take it or leave it there. But you're now into an era for the modern. We're looking at settings, and once you're in there, you've only set a few settings so far. So please understand that there's still a lot to kind of go through. That's the bad news. The good news is, again, it's really easy once you get these things set. Again, through maybe Operation Sports forums or wherever you're finding your settings from, you can go in and adjust these. Some of these you can just download straight through, right? So for instance, CPU versus user. I load in here. I can hit triangle on PS5 to load sliders. And you can pull up sliders that are hot. I don't think mine are going to be up at the top just yet because they're pretty new. But I know, like I said before, there's some other ones here. Like Schnate's are really, really good. So like we could load in his. And again, it's going to load in his gameplay sliders. Now, this does not load in everything. It loads in some things. So like it loads all of these, right? Or at least it should. So if you go in and look, he's going to have like, contract sliders and progression sliders, I think. Again, I think this all carries over, but this is where it's really, really important to just cross-check it on the actual threads on Operations Sports. So those are now in there. But it doesn't always load in, and I shouldn't say always. I don't know. I feel like it gives you the option, like see here, like I can save my settings, but I don't really know of a way to like import those settings. So like I'm assuming Nate's not using, or Snate, I should say, 12-minute quarter. So there are some things here you're going to need to go in and set for yourself. But that's the beauty too of having autosave off. You can get all those set. You can say, I always keep a save file from like the very first day of the season once I get everything cleaned up so that I never have to redo that. You could also just save it even as a scenario for yourself, so that you can just kind of jump in and play there. But again, there's a ton of settings. I won't go through them all here, all the way down to ticker. I did mention team selection. Team selection. That's the easiest way, just to grab another team, obviously. And then what you can do from there is you can actually go into like team settings here if you need to. So definitely check out the team settings section, but there's a whole other video potentially on just settings alone. But for now, just know that that's an area I would highly recommend you checking out before digging too deep into your MyNBA. Now, the next decision you're looking to make here is how do you want to actually play through your MyNBA? And that's really up to you, right? There's a lot of you who are going to want to just play all 82 games. You don't want to simulate anything, and that's fine. I like that too, but sometimes I don't always have time. Sometimes I like to go full simulation, for instance, like I'm doing in my Knicks streaming series, where we are just acting as a GM or assistant GM, which, by the way, you can do with all of the settings we just started kind of briefly talking about. At least you can set up that environment where you're really just a general manager. But you can set up things even like where you're just the commissioner of the league, so to speak. So there's a lot of different customization you can do. But some of that also just comes down to how you want to actually play the game. So, of course, playing the game, I don't need to really go over. That's pretty easy. Simulating, again, makes a lot of sense here. And this game does a really good job of using, say, your coach settings. It's going to use your game plan and so on. It uses even some of the gameplay sliders, which I talk about on my actual Operation Sports slider thread, at least. So again, these are pretty straightforward. These are nothing new in games. I don't really need to go over play or just kind of straight simulation. What you may not be aware of, though, are these different kind of secondary simulation options. So Simcast is pretty cool. Let's start with this one. So Simcast just kind of, it's going to let you just really see a really, really simple view of a simulated game. So it's like simulated in game, but really, really slowly. And again, the game does a great job of this will match very accurate. I mean, it will. It's not even accurately. It will 100% match, at least in the testing I've done, and just a straight, regular simulated game. Unlike Madden or some of these other games that allow you to kind of like do these different like play the moment modes or whatever, they don't always match up. Like they actually use a different simulation engine, for lack of a better explanation, and it can do some really, really wonky things to your stats, especially if you have like different quarter lengths and so on. And if you recall, when we just loaded in those settings, we didn't even adjust the quarter length. It was 5 minutes for games played, 12 minutes here for simulated games. So it's already taken our simulated time here, so you can see this. Now, the first thing I would do is with my R stick, I'm going to change the speed at the bottom of the screen to slowest, especially if this is new to you, because it can start to move a little quickly. But if I click simulate game, that's exactly what's going to happen here in the background. And so it's a really nice way just to kind of maybe be a little bit more involved, but maybe you don't have enough time to play a full game or to go in and say you want to do coach mode. This is a way you can kind of rip through coach mode a little bit quicker. What's neat is you can stop the simulation and you can actually play the game. You can jump into the actual game. So same thing, you could jump in and actually use your controller to play the game, or you could jump in and just do coach mode where you're actually seeing the graphics this time. But for this one, we're just going to kind of tear through it. And again, you can put the speed on normal. You can just kind of tear through it. Maybe you want to wait and see how things look in the fourth quarter. And then you can kind of decide, whether you'd want to jump in or not. And so, if we slow this way down, you can see, we're getting beat pretty bad. So this probably isn't a game worth jumping into. So we can just kind of tear through it here and just take our loss. And Snate's sliders are not kind right here. 144 to 111. That's pretty high. So there's also the option to use Simcast Live. This one is pretty cool and kind of brings you back to kind of like the older days of actual like tech sims and stuff, which is something I still play a lot of, like Out of the Park Baseball or Football Manager, going way back to games like Front Office Football, Sierra Sports, what was it called? Front Page Sports by Sierra. Just an amazing, series there. So, and again, there's even modern games that do some of this stuff here too, such as Wolverine Studios Draft Day Sports Pro Basketball, right? They have kind of a mode that looks a little bit like this. Truthfully, this is better. This looks really, really, really sharp. And gosh, I wish games like MLB The Show or Madden had stuff like this. You could see the ball actually even going over the. Oh, it's with the ref. I thought it went over the scoreboard. So again, really, really cool thing here. You can change the sim speed. But this really kind of shows you, like, especially say you're using like custom playbooks or something like this, how is the team performing? Are the right players taking the right amount of shots? This is a way I actually will work on my slider set a little bit to like look for tendencies. It's a really quick way just to kind of watch what's happening without loading into a game. So again, really, really cool thing here. It just gives you a little bit more freedom on how you go through and play your game. So it can go up to 6 times the speed. Generally, this is going to be slower than just the regular simcast because we are on the fastest speed right now, and it's we're still in the first quarter here. So, but again, it's such a cool thing. I don't think okay, you can. So there is a jump in option here. So same thing, you could jump in and kind of join the gameplay, but just really, really, really cool, really fun way again to play coach mode on kind of on the quick, so to speak. If you wanted just to kind of play coach mode a little bit quicker, so. Super, super cool. When you simulate, of course, it's just going to kind of take the results as is. And then again, it jumps you right to the end of the game here, where you can see the box scores and things like that. You can't see replays or anything like that. It'd be kind of cool if it saved some replays for you to check, but nonetheless, really, really cool. So not only are you kind of deciding how do you want to get through your games, I think it's worth also thinking about maybe a set schedule, because sometimes it's nice mixing these up. Like maybe you only play division games, or maybe you play every other game, or you play like 2 games a month, 1 game a week, something like that. Point is, just kind of have a schedule for yourselves, because it can get a little bit overwhelming when you start seeing 82 games, even if you're like, no, I'm going to play all of them. Well, that's a different story when you're 15 games in and you realize like, oh my gosh, I have a lot of games to play still. And that's just to get through one season, right? Part of this fun in MyNBA is building out your roster. So anyway, the idea is having an idea of how you want to play it out. There are tons of people, again, on the Operation Sports Forum, NBA Twitter, and so on, for 2K, who are really happy to kind of share their plans, how they use it. And I think just getting involved in some of those different threads where people are discussing this very thing can be really helpful, because I personally have gotten a lot of ideas on how to really get through different seasons and different games just by reading all of your comments and so on. Same thing here with the YouTube channel. So if you do have a suggestion on an approach you take that you think is unique or would be helpful, go ahead and leave a comment on that for sure, because those are super cool to read. Now, another really important consideration for your MyNBA are the future plans of it. What do you want to do? And that might be nothing. That might just be, I'm just going to play as many seasons as I can until next year's game comes out, and that's cool. Expansion, though, is a really, really popular option, and it's one of the most really probably used options here in the game that's really unique to NBA 2K, because I don't think any other game allows for expansion, at least for the modern sports games. There's relocation and Madden and things like that, but as far as expansion, I guess NHL does it, and I don't even know if they do it in the latest games. They don't have that game this year. But so this is actually my Knicks dynasty, and like this is what I'm planning to do here after the 3rd season. Is we are expanding to Europe, and we're putting 6 teams. There's going to be one division of 6 European teams in the Eastern Conference, and we're going to just reslot all of the rest of the current 30 NBA teams around the different divisions to balance for this. And that was just kind of a fun, unique way. We're seeing the NBA get more involved in Europe and in Asia. And I just think this is a really, really cool way. These teams are all real basketball teams, I think, with the exception of PSG, who I think they've kind of dabbled in a team, like, or they're kind of working on one. They're actually sponsored with, they have Jordan as a sponsor. But the idea is, like, kind of how Barcelona and Real Madrid are. They're kind of basing their teams as part of like a family with the soccer teams, the football teams over in Europe, right? So PSG, same kind of thing. So I thought that kind of created a really cool like 3-team, a soccer rivalry, so to speak. But you also have the natural rivalry with the teams in Spain. You have Italy, Berlin, London, and of course, Paris. All of these countries here, kind of forming a really fun rivalry. They have pretty popular basketball leagues now. I mean, Spain is incredibly, basketball is incredibly popular in Spain. So I thought having two teams there made a lot of sense. And again, regionally, this works. Basketball has been really popular in Turkey and Greece, even, for instance. But we start talking pretty far East Europe there. I just, when we think kind of travel plans, even in a video game, trying to think of those considerations, I think that's made a little bit more sense to go with teams like this. But again, Lisbon could be in the mix, and Portugal and things like that. But future plans, right? So whatever that might be, that could be different rule changes that you're going to go through during your off season. And again, there's a ton of options that we saw earlier in the video, not quite in detail, but I won't go through all of those. Just know that take the time to go through. You can veto, overrule, you can approve, reject, anything you really want to do year in and year out. But I think expansion is a really, really cool way. Another cool thing that you can do is you can not necessarily relocate, but you can rebrand your existing teams. Now, this might not even be your team. Let's say the Knicks, I don't want to touch them, they're a classic team, but maybe a team I don't know, who could use an updated look, maybe the Kings or something like that. You're going to go in and make that change, right? So you can do those sort of things. You can adjust their arenas. You could technically create them a different arena. So there's a lot of customization that you can do there. And I would just advise, two things, right? Be creative with it. Have a little fun with it. Experiment around, but keep some backups and keep those backup saves for a while, because you might not notice something until later. Maybe you go to play that team you relocated to Vegas 3 months into the season, and then you realize, oh, shoot, their court it's totally screwed up. The game thinks they play in Alaska or something, or whatever's going on. Well, you'll always have at least a backup, and it sucks to lose 2 months in your season. But at least you have the option if you need to go back. So again, I think being creative with your future plans, and just like you're kind of doing with your sim schedule and other things, it's just having a plan. I think having a plan for what you want the future of the league to look like is really cool. And similarly, you can find discussion on those topics around various forums on Twitter and so on. Another really undervalued element that could add to your MyNBA experience is actually sharing your MyNBA. I've talked about the Operation Sports forums and various other outlets like Twitter and so on, but there are threads dedicated to basically dynasty reporting or franchise, or in this case, MyNBA reporting, where you are sharing the stories. And some of these people get really into it. They have pictures, they kind of write articles like they're out of a newspaper or a magazine, and it's really, really cool. And it really kind of forces you to get a little bit more involved in your MyNBA, into the depth of it. So this is my Knicks series, right? This is the end of the second season. I always keep a save at the end of each season, by the way, something I recommend doing. We are the number 1 seed, best team in the NBA, and we lost in 7 games to my Detroit Pistons. This hurt. This was a huge bummer. And on my streaming series, we were talking about it and whatnot. We had a really, really strong roster here, and we were sad. I mean, this was really, really sad. We made a big trade for Jamal Murray before the season started. We signed Eric Beverly to come in and do some shutdown defense, and it worked. We had the best team in the NBA. We went from the worst points against in the NBA to the best points against in one season. We had a massive turnaround. This team was so good, but this team ended up getting injured. So we had injuries to Mitchell Robinson out for the year. It says 2 to 4 weeks there, but that's because the season's over. But he was out for the year. We then made a trade for Daniel Gafford, and then he got hurt pretty much immediately after we got him. And so we really had to struggle to kind of fill some of those gaps that we just assumed were going to be there. And so we had some key cogs from the draft, such as Cason Wallace. We also made a trade later on for Amen Thompson. And so this was just a really, really fun team that gelled together. But, it was so sad when we lost, right? And again, it's just like the kind of the real sports we watch every day, whether it's the NBA or MLB or whatever else, that, you can really kind of form an attachment to your players. And I think the idea is sharing that story somewhere. By nature, as human beings, we are storytellers. This is something that's ingrained in our DNA, right? And so modern storytelling, video games, they are part of that, period, whether people realize it or not. And so I think that's just a really, really cool way that you can get some deeper immersion, and people are going to find it interesting. People watch my streaming series, hopefully because they find it interesting. I try to give them a role to participate in those, and it's a lot of fun that way. So Again, I think just finding ways to kind of create storylines, not just for yourself, but maybe for the community who's checking that out. And you'd be surprised how many people are going to get into the stories that you create in your MyNBA. Finally, the last suggestion I would make is to think about the sort of role that you want to be. That could be a player-locked player. It could be just acting as a coach where you kind of automate all of the GM functions like trades and drafting and so on, and you just work on game planning and kind of roster management. That could be you're working on just a general manager side of things, like I like to do, where you're allowing the coach to set his own game plan and again the starting rotation and things like that. It could even really be like a commissioner mode, right? So you could actually go in here and you could get to like the league meeting stage, and as we saw earlier, you could go in and either reject or overrule different rules. You can add different rules and so on. And so there's just a lot of different things that you could do to really kind of act as a commissioner, right? We can replace a rule. We saw these earlier, but you can go in and just add different things. It would be really cool if one day they kind of let you almost like a rule creator, like they kind of have some of the like filter creations and things like this, or like I think they're technically called like game triggers, where you can set up just different random things that you can search for in a game or have happen, or like have the coach, like if you're winning by 20 points, always take out your starters or something like that. Those are just kind of triggers that you can actually establish in this game. But it would be cool if you could actually do even a rule creation. But nonetheless, you have a lot of features and things that you can do. But one of the things you will want to go in here and do is adjust your team settings. So even if you have to at least keep one team selected, right? So we're still the Knicks here. But let's just say, I want to start playing as commissioner. I want to just move ahead 10 years or whatever you're trying to do. I can go into my team settings and I can still adjust. There's not a whole lot you really need to adjust in here. I would turn off can be fired. But other than that, like what I have at least already going is fine. And you can just kind of see these here. Like I turned off the staff quit because I thought it was kind of weird. There's the randomized governor option, by the way. I knew it was somewhere. But here I could go in and I can just automate all of this stuff. I already had some coach automation because, like I said, I'm playing more as a GM role. But I can go in and just turn all of these to automate. And this is now essentially turning the New York Knicks into a CPU team, right? And so, by the way, if you notice when you scroll up on this list, trades will turn itself off. If you've ever had I see so many people posting like, hey, for some reason, no teams are making trades. It's not working. That's why. It's been in this game for a couple years now, but it's really weird. If you scroll, I don't think it does it a second time. No. But when you scroll down to the bottom and back up, it'll do that. So now we're actually set up in a way that the Knicks are fully automated. And really now I'm just kind of overseeing the league. And you could go in here and kind of almost do kind of the opposite. We could select all teams. Now we control all teams, and I can just go in and instead I can set those team settings for all user teams, right? So I don't need to adjust those too much, but I can go in here. See, they're saying custom because only the Knicks have this, but you have to go through and do all these again, do on, but you get the idea. I scroll down, I put all those to on, and now you're gonna have a fully automated league that you're really acting as the commissioner for, and then you could just kind of see how the league unfolds. Let's say you're 15 years old and you're playing this game. You're like, well, obviously it's ridiculous. I would never be hired as a 15-year-old general manager. But maybe when you're 35, right? So what if you simulated 20 years into the future? What's the NBA look like then? You could kind of act as that kind of pseudo commissioner until then, and then you could grab a team where the whole league basically is going to be fictional players. The drafts are going to be fictional. It can be a really, really cool environment. You can move teams around. You can contract teams, not only have expansion drafts, but contraction team setups as well. So lots of really, really cool things that you can do there, again, with customization. So I just encourage you to explore those different things. And the last thing I'll say is don't forget that NBA 2K has the WNBA in it as well. And you want to talk about a really, really fun challenge, or if you really want to play the role of like, oh, I want to act like I'm a new GM, I was just hired. Well, this is where you could start, right? Prove yourself. And I would love to see the NBA 2K game allow you to kind of run both of these leagues at the same time, where you could start in the WNBA and kind of like work your way up to maybe to be an assistant GM or to be an assistant coach in the NBA or what have you. That would be super, super cool. And then we could even start talking about things like if they bring a college game back, What if this game had like a high school mode where you could be like a high school coach who gets hired at a small college or something like that later on? So lots of really cool things that you could do. But I think it's worth mentioning that you have the WNBA here, not just the rosters, but you also have the WNBA draft classes. And even when you go through and do fictional ones, they're pretty good. Like I've actually said, I think the fictional draft classes for the WNBA, they look better. They look more realistic, and I don't know if they've just been like they've gotten updated more recently because it's a newer feature in the game. But to me, the fictional draft classes for the NBA they lack, and they kind of lag behind what the WNBA drafted classes are. So I think these just look exceptional. I think they look really realistic. You have hyphenated names there that have been generated, and it's just super cool. So again, that's an option that you have. That's one way that you could kind of go through and make things unique. So I hope this video is helpful. If it is, give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to get more information such as this, because we are not only doing tutorial videos like this, but we're streaming franchise modes, we're streaming MyNBA, we're streaming tech simulation games, all kinds of different stuff here where you're able to kind of get in and really dig deep into these games to learn more about the sport that you're trying to get familiar with and learn more about. And that's what this whole series, really this whole channel is about, is enjoying sports games, teaching through sports games, learning through sports games, and really sharing with each other here our experiences. So I'm curious to hear yours as well. Share your tips. I would greatly appreciate seeing what you have as far as the tips that you use for MyNBA that we didn't talk about here, because you all have some amazing ideas too that I think could be great. So I'm Mike Lowe. I'm on Twitter at MikeLowe47, and I appreciate you checking out this video so very much, and I will see you next time.